Hey everyone, it has been quite a while, so doing a quick check-in here. The game's been kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern, ostensibly. It's really kind of me thinking through some things. I've also had some other things going on. I had a documentary project that I've been working on for a long time, and due to some other deadlines, I had to kind of focus on that for a bit. I also took over as chair of my department for the first time, so that's been sucking up a lot of my time, but I'm learning a lot, and some of it might end up filtering its way into the game because that's my first time in an administrative role. So, potentially useful down the road for this. But the big thing is just kind of figuring out where I'm going with this at this point, and that's why there's been a little bit of a delay, and thought I'd just check in and see if anyone has any thoughts on this. So the last video I did was about cutting things out of the game, and I talked about some elements that had been in there in various ways, and I just decided were kind of more confusing than they were adding value to the game, so getting rid of those. But it was still keeping the same overall game. I'd kind of gotten to a point where things were in, I won't say anywhere near finished shape, but in pretty good shape. The game kind of worked and the mechanics were there. I had all my pieces set up, so, little dual-sided play mats for the players. I have big game board. I have all the different cards and such, tokens, all sorts of various things, and had been doing some play tests. And one of the things that the recent play tests had really just sort of made abundantly apparent was that this really is just a more complicated game than I had originally envisioned. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I like playing some complicated games. And there's certainly a market for those among sort of hardcore gamers, but it was a kind of realization that was very different than what I originally intended, which was more of an educational game, something that you could jump into, play for an hour, learn something about how academia works. Hopefully, if you were thinking of going that way, get a sense of like what it really is and if that's something you want to do. And instead, what the game had sort of evolved into was a pretty complex system with a lot of moving parts, a lot of different things to think about, not necessarily a quick learning curve. And, something where if it's your first time playing a game could go really long. In fact, one of the issues I had with some of the recent playtests is a lot of times we would just get through sort of the first phase of the game, the grad school aspect, and just as people were kind of getting into the academia part of it, often we would wrap up because if it was a playtest session that we only had, a limited amount of time for, we wouldn't even get to the bulk of that. So I actually have some playtests coming up, one next week, where I'm actually going to start us kind of post-grad school and just you're out of grad school, starting in an academic job, and see how that part goes. Because some feedback that I had gotten is actually it's almost like two different games, the grad school aspect and the academia aspect. And I know I've talked in previous videos about how I kind of wanted to integrate those and keep those together. But I'm, taking that feedback and thinking seriously about it and like, okay, let me see what a version would do. And I'm keeping the same game mechanic and board and everything, just like we're going to kind of start several rounds in and people already have their graduate degree and such. Anyway, it's an interesting question, and I feel like I'm kind of at a point where now I have to figure out, like, do I want to just embrace this as a complex game and go with that and kind of make that the target at the game market, people who are interested in, more complicated games like that. I've mentioned before, I'm a big Gloomhaven, Frosthaven fan, and I'm not saying this is anywhere near as big or complicated as that, but, that market more where it's something like, hey, there's a lot of different strategic aspects, a lot of things going on at the same time, and it might take you a few hours to get through a session. Or do I really want to try to strip it back down to what I originally intended as a sort of more educational, quick to get in and quick to play game? And I don't know, I'm kind of debating those, and that's why I've been on a bit of a hiatus, because I'm not really doing any work developing either aspect of it, just kind of pondering that and thinking about it. And then, as I mentioned, have been focused on other things, so I haven't had a lot of time to devote to this. That's kind of where it's at right now. For anyone watching this, if you've watched some of the other videos and have a sense of kind of how the game works and some of the aspects of it, be curious what things people say, like, yeah, I really do like that. That part sounds cool, or this part sounds too complicated. Does the more complex game or a more stripped down, like learn and play in an hour version seem more interesting to people? And I don't know, I'm kind of figuring out what I want to do, and it might be that I end up having to make two totally different games. Luckily, I'm not designing games for a living, and this is just sort of a side hobby thing that I'll have lots of time to figure out what I want to do with it, and when it's ready, it'll be out. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not planning on doing any other videos in the immediate future as I'm sort of still figuring out what to do with this, and I want to get through my next couple rounds of play tests, particularly some of those where, like I said, we're starting post-grad school, and see how those go. And that might give me some insight as to what's the direction I want to take this. So that's the update. I don't know when the next video will be, but I'll keep you informed as decisions get made. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.